It's Dave Johal. Pleased to be joined by my colleague Ra Hokum for Punchout Boxing as we pay tribute to George Foreman and Colin Hart, who sadly passed away a day apart last week. Um, Bells were rang across various shows in England, across the country, no doubt in the US as well. And we're just here to celebrate the lives of two integral parts of British and world boxing. Ra, what are your memories of first of all big George Foreman and George Foreman?
Yeah, it's good that you did refer to him in two guises because yeah, he of course essentially did have almost uniquely two careers, didn't he? The original one back in the 70s. Um, uh, neither of us are old enough to remember him fully from then. But of course, that first incarnation of George Foreman, the sinister puncher, he was involved in arguably the biggest boxing event in history, that Rumble in the Jungle against Muhammad Ali fight, which, even now 50 years on is still talked about. There's just the sheer global scale that, in terms of how it captured the imagination of the public worldwide. Um, and of course, yeah, he was an integral part of that. It was remembered more because Muhammad Ali won, but just the fearsome fighter that Foreman was, that made it the event it was. But of course, I do much more remember Big George Foreman, the second incarnation of him. Again, a lot of my childhood memories growing up, after a 10-year hiatus, he came back, was a very changed man. Um, and yeah, of course, did the unthinkable. He became the oldest heavyweight champion in history, regained it at the age of 45. Just a few years younger than me and a couple of years older than you, I believe. I mean, unthinkable to think that that's what he did. Um, so yeah, really one of the genuine all-time greats. And he could, I think, either incarnation of his career on their own would have been great careers, Hall of Fame worthy. But then you put the two together, and yeah, it really is one of the all-time great careers. Yeah, but very sad. And also, it seemed his death seemed to come out of nowhere. I know he was
Yeah.
76, and at that age, of course, people's health can deteriorate, quite quickly. But I think in the case of Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier, his contemporaries, we were braced for it because I think their health had been declining, and we knew about that. But Big George, it seemed like even relatively recently he still looked his usual jovial and healthy self when he was appearing in public. So yeah, it was a bit more of a shock, I think, in that sense. But yeah, what a genuine all-time great who transcended the sport.
Totally agree. I mean, look, from winning gold in the 1968 Olympics, you could argue he had three careers because the amateur career was absolutely amazing, and I think at that point as
Hmm.
well, America, after Muhammad Ali had his hiatus, was crying out for a new wave of heavyweight because they were used to Joe Frazier dominating as well. Muhammad Ali had was still around. Um, but I think one of the most devastating knockouts on George Foreman's resume, something that really transcended boxing, in my opinion, as well, was the down goes Fraser,
Mm.
being announced. The way he savagely knocked out Joe Fraser, I think that really put him on the map worldwide. So that's a memory. Unfortunately, I wasn't alive for that, but as someone going back to the sport, that was absolutely amazing. Um, and look, what's really interesting as well was when he fought Muhammad Ali, he was almost seen as the villain. a very young age as well. So I think he was kind of bewildered, and a bit rabbit in the headlights. He wasn't expecting this hatred. And
Mhm.
if you go to when he knocked out Michael Moorer, losing every round in the fight, and then he knocks out Michael Moorer out of, I wouldn't even say out of nowhere, because it was a perfectly timed shot, and he beat the heavyweight champion of the world, which was a massive upset. You could say that was redemption, wasn't it, from 74? History repeating itself in a very different way. And that's what makes this sport captivating, doesn't it, Ra?
Yeah, and I didn't realize it to one of our colleagues, George Yakovich, who we spoke to on our colleagues over at iBoxing Hub's podcast. He's done a great documentary about it. And Big George, he wore the same trunks that he wore that infamous night in Kinshasa.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, he obviously had his that sense of redemption and putting to bed that night. It was interesting. Of course, me and you, we went to the live immersive
Yeah,
play, the
yeah,
recreation of the Rumble in the Jungle. Was it a year ago? Which, by the way, absolutely stunning event. Really recreated the whole event superbly. Um, but the final sort of scene where it was actually in the ring, where the actor, the scene was set that they cut to Foreman's thoughts after he got knocked out. How you said he was bewildered about being the cast as the villain,
yeah,
and that scene. If anyone who watches the play, you'll see what I'm referring to. How he 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 expected that he was going to be the hero, and he expected that he just needed to win to take the status of Muhammad Ali, and that really affected him psychologically. I guess as a young man, I guess he didn't understand his surly, abrasive personality wasn't going to win people over. It didn't matter that he was winning in the ring. But that was interesting, and I guess it took just years maturity as a man to realize, that's why it weren't meant for him to be the hero at that particular time. But of course, he did go on to become that hero later on in life.
yeah. I mean, I'm so honored to have interviewed him a couple of years ago,
Hmm.
with the promotion of the George Foreman, the Big George film. Um, and you and I, we spoke to some some big boxers in terms of names, some up and comers, but we hardly get phased, because it's the sport. This is our trade. Um, but he is probably one of two people where you thought, wow, am I actually interviewing George Foreman? And it's quite interesting as well, because he still had an eye on the sport. And I asked him as well, I asked him, George, what was different about the 70s and certainly 80s, and where everybody fought each other? Why aren't people fighting each other now? And he says sometimes, that fighters don't admit it to each other, but they might just be scared. That's what he said. He said sometimes fighters might be scared, and there's no shame in being scared. Um, so and he said as well that the real fight he wanted to watch, unfortunately, he won't be able to watch it now because the fight hasn't materialized. Would have been Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury. That's the fight he wanted to watch. Um,
Hmm.
and he still had an eye for the game. Even it never leaves you, does it? That's the thing. Um, we could actually say as well, George Foreman had another career after boxing, which was the George Foreman Grill. Um, I mean, what a did you own one first of all? Do you still have one? The fad's kind of gone now,
I
isn't
I do still have one. I mean, I think they were still a thing until relatively recently. I think the advent of air fryers um, has probably removed the need for them. But up until a couple of years ago, I think they were still fairly popular. I think by all accounts, he made more from his royalties from the grill than he did from his boxing purses over his career. So in that sense, it is a bit of a fairy story ending for him because I mean, how many times have we seen great fighters end up penniless and alone at the end of their careers? In the case of Big George, he went out wealthy and surrounded by his family. So as good an ending as any of us could ask for.
Yeah, and when he beat Michael Moore, it wasn't just for one scrap as well. It's for the WBA and the IBF.
Yeah.
Massive statement, wasn't it, as well? So to reclaim the heavyweight throne, and am I right in thinking as well? Yes, oldest ever heavyweight champion to this day. But I think Bernard Hopkins holds a record for the oldest champion, doesn't he? So I think George
Yeah.
was up there. In the Boxing Hall of Fame prior to his death, he was ranked the eighth best heavyweight of all time as well. In any iteration, whether it was George Foreman 2.0, the Christian
Hmm.
comeback, uh, and even as his time in the 70s, it, I mean, there were two separate careers, but which one did you prefer? Did you like the mean George Foreman, the one that, Mike Tyson-esque? Sorry, Mike
Oh,
Tyson.
Sonny Liston-esque,
It's a
I
bit of
think.
both, wasn't it?
Yeah.
The mean puncher, destroying a heavy bag, or did you prefer the nuanced, chilled out, Burger King loving preacher, George
You know
Foreman?
what? I can't say either one. They both are just legendary in their own right. I mean, of course, we're always fascinated by those, um, those mean danger men. I think it's fair to say that he was in his first incarnation, but the second career, we always also equally love rooting for the good guy and the hero. So no, I can't say I had a preference. I mean, of course, like I said, Big George 2.0, that was the version I actually remember sort of seeing growing up. Um, Maybe just for that reason, he was a slight preference. But as we are big boxing fans, we're historians of it as well. And we'll look back at the story of him in his first incarnation. And I tell you what's all the more remarkable about George 2.0 is after that 10-year hiatus, I was just looking back at his record. He didn't just come back, have a couple of fights and, get hyped up as a novelty. He did genuinely work his way back up into being a contender. I was looking at the fights he had. He had a good 20 odd fights. So he was happy to start again at the bottom. So he almost was like just a prospect being built up again. Um, and he gradually fought better and better opponents, culminated with a crack at Evander Holyfield. He gave him a hard night's work. And you'd have thought after that point, well, at his age, okay, it was one last hurrah, that's it. But again, after losing to Holyfield, he fought a couple of other good contenders, not the best, but good ones. So it weren't just a case of he got the heavyweight title shots just by being this novelty act or just off the back of popularity. I would argue that Big George earned his cracks at the heavyweight title more than some of these modern contenders do. Yeah.
Yeah, legitimately as well, to be
Um,
fair. I mean, he did have a good run. I almost forgot the fight with Evander Holyfield. I mean, I think questions were more asked about Michael Moorer, weren't they? To be fair, because
yeah, yeah, yeah.
with Big George, he was expected almost to lose, and I think
Mhm.
Buffer said last week as well that when he announced the result, he was so overjoyed, or words to that effect. I'm paraphrasing here, but it's everyone thought he was going to lose, and more questions were asked about Michael Moorer. So even if George Foreman went on to lose a few afterwards, and it was almost like having his swan. Michael Moorer was the swan song, wasn't it, Ra? That was
Yeah,
he couldn't do any more after that. Even if he did,
yeah,
the high note would have been Michael Moorer.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was inevitable that after that, Big George would have a few more sort of easy fights. And he bowed out against Shannon Briggs, of course. Um, but yeah, I don't think anyone will hold that against him losing to Shannon Briggs. It was still a prime Shannon Briggs, by the way, and it only went out on points. Um, so, but yeah, extraordinary first two careers. Interesting thing about his first incarnation as heavyweight champ, all of his major fights were outside the United States. Yeah. So, I
Well,
mean, people in the modern era complaining about, oh, all these big fights going to Riyadh and what have you. It's not actually entirely a new thing. Yeah, you look at he beat Joe Frazier in
Harmon.
Kingston, Jamaica.
Oh, yeah, okay, yeah.
Um, his first defense against Jose Roman, that was in Japan. Beat Ken Norton in Caracas, Venezuela, of all places. And of course, lost in Kinshasa. So, yeah, that's a bit of a side note that's forgotten about him. Maybe that was one reason why he never endeared himself to the fans in America the first time round, because all his big fights were abroad. Um, so yeah, interesting aspect of his career uh,
On,
like I said, side note.
yeah, I mean, another person who sadly bowed out of the sport and of life was Colin Hart a day afterwards
Yeah,
on the Saturday. Um, I've had the honour, the pleasure of sitting next to Colin Hart on many a show ringside, as of you. Um, Colin would still be taking notes at that age, and it's quite admirable, isn't it? I mean, still a great servant to the sport. One of the very few that's there with the written press. And I keep on saying of that age, but it's great to see. Colin was still at fights. What are your thoughts on? Sorry, what are your recollections or anecdotes on Colin Hart?
yeah, he's been an absolute permanent fixture of British boxing for sure, and I would say world boxing. Of course, as you said, written press. So he's seen the evolution of the sport, not just the sport, also how it's covered in terms of the media. Um, he's covered it longer than I think just about anyone else, because he did a show on Talksport recently. So if he was just weeks away from his 90th birthday. He started when he left school at 20 covering the sport. So 70 years. So he's been covering the sport longer than Frank Warren's been promoting, longer than Bob Arum's been promoting. It's fair to say that Colin might well have been the longest serving servant to the sport. So yeah, extraordinary man. Rest in peace. Um, yeah, my own personal recollection, I only actually spoke to him once, and it would probably have been one of his last shows. But I was seated next to him at the Wardley v Clark show at the O2. And
What a
even at
fight!
that age,
What a fight as well. To
what a fight, yeah. But I mean, as you said, even at that age, his mind was still absolutely clear and sharp when it came to boxing. He knew exactly what he was talking about and what he was watching. Um, and I brought up with him, obviously, me and you, we cover this sport when we talk to a lot of fighters. So I brought up the infamous incident where he had a public spat with the great Nassim Hamed at a press conference. And Nas was, of course, quite rude to him. We know Nassim Hamed was quite the egotistical fighter, so any fighter, any press person who didn't speak flatteringly about him would have got him up. But I did ask him about that, and I guess a bit of advice, like how do you deal with the fact that fighters are going to get annoyed with us as media people if we aren't flattering enough to them? And he just laughed it off and he said, "Yeah, look, you're going to have to." You're going to get fighters that will fall out with you if you don't stroke their ego sufficiently. But it's the nature of the sport. It is a highly egotistical sport, and yeah, he had the right mindset to deal with it. But yeah, like I said, he still seemed very clear-headed back then, and but again, at nearly 90, I guess your health can deteriorate quite quickly.
Well, here's hoping we're still doing this at that age.
Absolutely,
A
yeah. I mean,
positive
he's an
note.
inspiration to
Absolutely, and it's a sport that we enjoy. We enjoy what we do and the people we meet and where we go. So, rest in peace, rest in power as well to Colin Hart and George Foreman. You will be missed in the boxing community, and you know, great ambassadors and servants to the sport. Ra, moving on to this week, what have you got on? Where are you going to be this weekend?
Sunday, I am going to Johnny Clark's Top Tier show at the York Hall. Top Tier's first show at York Hall, in fact. Normally, Johnny, we know he likes Essex,
Yeah,
but he's doing something different. It's a great show. His fighter, Konstantin Ursu, fighting Ethan James for the Commonwealth welterweight title. That's headlining. If he wins that, he's well in the mix for some of the big fights at welterweight. There's a couple other big names on there. Stevie Levy and Kevin Ajaka are both having tune-up fights. And yeah, great to have a show on Sunday afternoon. I guess it being on DAZN, they're able to coordinate better. So the cards are not all clashing. So yeah, that's where I'll be this weekend.
good stuff. Next week, we will be over in Manchester for heavy dosage, heavy impact. Let me make sure I get the
Heavy
name right.
impact.
Heavy impact. If
Yeah.
you want to use heavy dosage, there you go. You can have a fair crack. But heavy impact, our new colleague Bally will be covering that on Saturday, just getting in the results. Uh, and then we've got some interviews coming up as well, particularly with the WBC Grand Prix season. So we've got quite a few interviews still to be uploaded. Make sure you stay tuned on Punchout Boxing. Please follow our channel, our handles, and we will be posting everything we can soon. If you haven't seen it already, we'll post a link to the George Foreman interview I did from a few years ago. So have a look out for that. And guys, stay tuned. Cheers, Rob.